honoring Black history.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us as we honor Black history. I'm Kyra Lake. As we kick off the celebration of Black History Month here at WLNS, it's only right that we acknowledge some of the Black women who made history within recent months. One of those women is Kyra Harris Bolden, and last year she became the very first Black woman on the Michigan Supreme Court. Dylan Horn caught up with her and is here for you now with her story.
Representation truly matters because what I like to say is, it's really hard to be what you cannot see, but once you can see it, you can achieve it.
Southfield native, member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, mother, and now the first Black woman to serve on the highest court in our state.
I try not to cry every time because I know how much this means to so many people.
Kyra Harris Bolden was born in 1988, which makes her 34 years old and the youngest person to ever serve on Michigan's Supreme Court.
I think a lot of people see me as just this super ambitious person, and I really don't see myself like that.
Now among some of the greats that changed history in 2022, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, who became the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Again, it's just such an honor that essentially in the same time period that we would have the first Black woman on the United States Supreme Court, and that I could be the first Black woman on the Michigan Supreme Court, both of which are well overdue.
Bolden attended Grand Valley State University to study psychology, but it was during that time she realized she would study law after she learned what happened to her great-grandfather.
In 1939, my great-grandfather, Jesse Lee Bond, was lynched in Tennessee after asking a store owner for a receipt, and he was beaten and castrated and thrown into the local river. The coroner deemed it an accidental drowning, and as a result, his murderers walked free.
This story ignited her passion for justice. She enrolled at the University of Detroit Mercy Law School. She would go on to work as an attorney and hold a seat on the legislature representing her hometown of Southfield.
Then decided I wanted to do more.
And more is what she did. While pregnant, Bolden decided to pursue a seat on the Michigan Supreme Court during 2022's midterm elections, but it was not an easy choice at the time.
I was going to self-eliminate myself just because I was pregnant and was going to have a child.
As a woman of color, she had her doubts.
There's already kind of that gap of women being in positions of power, and then when you talk specifically about Black women, you have a more marginalized group. So when we're talking about judgeships, there's already just a smaller pool of individuals that can ascend to certain positions of power.
Less than 2 months before Election Day, she had her baby girl, Emerson, who Bolden now calls her greatest strength. And her strength has been recognized all around the world, including at Dawson Elementary School in Detroit, where a mural was painted in her honor. Now, just like others who broke barriers in Michigan's Supreme Court, Bolden's photo will sit here for years to come.
And I'm really enjoying just being one of 7 equal voices at a really important decision-making table.
Here for you at the Michigan Hall of Justice, Dylan Horn, 6 News.
And Black women aren't just making their mark in the judiciary. As it turns out, they lead both of Michigan's major political parties too. Democrats just re-elected LeVar Barnes to run their party. She's keeping the post she was first elected to in 2019. And Barnes is also the first Black person to ever hold this job. And just a few days ago, the Michigan Republican Party voted to make Christina Caramo their leader. The former GOP nominee for Secretary of State beat out 10 other candidates for the job, and this includes former Attorney General nominee Matt DePerno, who was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. They join the 2 Black men who are helping lead the executive and legislative branches of government. Voters just re-elected Garland Gilchrist to serve a second term as the state's lieutenant governor, and the former computer engineer in Michigan, Brad, had a wide range of responsibilities in his first term, including a stint as the head of the coronavirus task force of racial disparities. Then there's Joe Tate. He became Michigan's first Black Speaker of the House last month, and that's after the Democrats took over as the majority party. Tate represents Michigan's 10th House District, which includes the northeast parts of Detroit and the whole Grosse Pointe area. The former Spartan football and NFL star will now run the House for the next 2 years. And when we come back, we're going to introduce you to another woman who is making a difference, and we'll show you how getting her own life in order has helped her serve as an inspiration to others. Welcome back. We're here at WLNS. We take time each year to honor remarkable women. Now, these women are devoted to their families and the community and make a difference in people's lives. And we're about to introduce you to a woman who started off on the wrong path, but not only did she turn her own life around, she now devotes herself to helping other young women. Sarah Alshay has her story.
It's been 10 years since Anastasia Trevino walked these halls of Sexton High School as a student. Now she walks them as a mentor.
Okay, now just tilt this way.
She works as a student support coordinator for Communities in Schools, a nonprofit that helps students succeed in the classroom, something Anastasia struggled with growing up.
I was definitely troubled. I had a lot of different things that I was trying to balance in high school.
Anastasia dropped out of Sexton her senior year. She says she didn't have the easiest childhood.
5936, right there. That's the one that we was in the most.
By the age of 18, she had already lived in 10 different homes.
This is it right here, this little space. Yeah. And that was the smallest little baby room ever.
Anastasia says she was constantly kicked out of school.
There was a time where I ended up getting into a different fight and I got arrested right there. I was confused and probably angry.
Her family ended up homeless. Anastasia moved to Chicago to stay with her aunt and finish high school. When she came back to Lansing, she focused more on her passion for hair. After years of building up her clientele, in the middle of the pandemic, Anastasia started her own salon and spa business, Bella Vita.
That's what Bella Vita means in Italian, beautiful life.
Anastasia went from being homeless at several points in her life to being a first-generation business owner. She says her business was one of the biggest accomplishments of her life, but Anastasia was still looking for something more. So she returned to the school she left and now works with students at Sexton, providing a safe space to check in.
If I needed something, I know she has my back. That's my mom, my school mom.
Giving academic support when needed and making sure they have basic needs.
Clothes, coats, food, hats, shoes. We keep that stuff stocked up.
Hanging on her classroom wall, the words grind, hustle, and execution. Words Anastasia instills in her students because they're words she's lived by. Anastasia didn't have a traditional upbringing, but she's grateful it brought her to where she is.
Coming from that, the homelessness and all the things that I went through in between, being here now, I felt like it was purposeful.
And now that she's here, she says she wouldn't change one bit of her story.
I love who I've grown into, and all of the lessons I've learned in these journeys definitely has shown me more and more like my true self.
Here for you in Lansing, Sarah Alshay, 6 News.
And still ahead, we're going to introduce you to another remarkable Black woman, and we'll show you how she tackled a couple of different causes to help our community in its time of need. We continue our series of stories on remarkable Black women with a story about a nurse who started out with one good deed that quickly changed her life. And now she's sharing her passion for a number of different causes. And I actually caught up with her in 2021, and this is what she had to say.
See, I'm not the type to just want to tell you what I want to do. I'm going to do it.
We first met Tamakaya Foster, a nurse, in May of 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're going into the rooms and we're helping our COVID patients, but I can't go into that room without somebody helping. I can't stand on somebody's shoulders without them knowing I appreciate them. So for me, I can't give them a hug to say thank you, but if I can give you a bag and a smile, to me, that's wonders.
There you go. She had reached out to Operation Gratitude, a nonprofit, and other organizations, which sent $22,000 in donations. Foster and other nurses assembled this into care packages for 800 McLaren staff members.
What came with these gift boxes is letters from people all over the world saying thank you. And those words help keep pushing us to stay in the fight. Those words gives us the momentum to keep going. And this is just the push that we need.
She gives. She's a person that gives constantly. She's not a taker. And she's proud of what she's done. And now you've got me sort of crying.
I can't breathe. Fist up!
But just as quickly as COVID-19 became a concern for communities across the country, viral videos of police brutality became front and center and a concern for the Black community.
I want to stop the killing. I want to stop crying.
And after seeing this as a Black woman, Foster had set a new goal for herself.
June 27th, I had my own protest on the Capitol, and it was a silent sit-in against racism. And everybody, it was a vision that God gave me, and everybody wore white to represent peace and all the souls that's passed from violence. And yellow was our leaders, to show that our leaders need to get a bright idea for a brighter future.
Her mission was to celebrate the lives lost to violence while exposing the pain of racism. And while raising awareness, she got the attention of the Lansing police chief. And the list of contributions continues.
I spoke at the Proud Boys event, so did a moment of silence at both of McLaren's hospitals. For the Lansing Park and Recreations, their Black History Month celebration, I was staying busy.
And for the future, Foster is in the works of starting her own nonprofit, and she also hopes to work with Michigan State Representative Sarah Anthony on the Crown Act to protect people from unequal treatment based on race-based hairstyles.
Whether it's in dreads, whether it's in braids, whether it's in my beautiful afro or my curly hair.
So why do all this?
I have children, and one day I'll have grandchildren, and I want to leave a legacy, and I want to go to my grave knowing that I've changed this world for them, and not just for those that come after me, but for other people's children. And I just want to make a difference in the right way.
Well, still ahead, we are sharing the story of one of the legal legends of the civil rights movement. We'll take you to a one-of-a-kind museum exhibit that honors Black history. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're now going to take you back in time and talk about one of the nation's greatest civil rights icons, Dr. Martin Luther King. King was assassinated in 1968, but two of the people who worked with him were in Michigan a few weeks ago to help honor him. The Lansing MLK Commission welcomed attorney Fred Gray to mid-Michigan, and King himself once described Gray as, quote, the chief counsel for the protest movement. Gray gave legal advice to King's Montgomery Improvement Association as well as the NAACP, and he also served as Rosa Parks' lawyer after she was charged with refusing to give up her seat to a white person. At the event, he spoke about his role in the civil rights movement and about his relationship with King.
Just like he was selected to be the spokesman, I was selected to be the lawyer for the group. But our relationship was almost professional, because you can imagine with 50,000 black people staying off of buses, crippling the bus company, there were legal matters that had to be discussed. So I had to discuss, and he was the person who was speaking for them. He would always want to know, well, what does the law say? Because I tell him what the law says, and then he can decide what he wants to do.
And just down the road on Martin Luther King Day was a man who was in Memphis on the fateful day when King was killed. Jesse Jackson was in the Motor City, and he joined Michigan officials, including the Lieutenant Governor, Senator Gary Peters, several members of Congress, and the mayor of Detroit. They gathered for an event called Let Freedom Ring to pay tribute to King's life and sacrifice. Well, our next story is about Black history that's literally on the road. The Black History 101 Mobile Museum has visited more than 1,000 sites in 41 states, and as part of the celebration of Black culture and to educate others about its rich history, the museum recently stopped in East Lansing. Shamir Owens takes us inside for a closer look.
Through artifacts, you get a sense of history that you don't necessarily get through textbooks.
Dr. Khalid El-Hakim is the founder of the Black History 101 Mobile Museum. The award-winning collection features more than 10,000 original artifacts of Black memorabilia dating back to the transatlantic slave trade era all the way up to hip-hop culture. Dr. El-Hakim says he started collecting items in an effort to see himself in history.
I think I've been a collector my whole life. Started off collecting comic books and baseball cards and football cards, but it grew into a collection of black memorabilia over time.
And because of his passion and commitment to his roots, Dr. El-Hakim would go on to use black memorabilia to better educate his students.
Going into the classroom as a young teacher in the 90s and assessing the resources I had in the classroom and seeing that there were gaps in the history, was using artifacts was a way to bring my students into an understanding of black history and black culture. Dr. El-Hakim says a historical march served as a turning point in his life that inspired him to share these artifacts beyond the classroom. 1995 in the Million Man March, where it was a call for 1 million black men to come to Washington, D.C. under the themes of atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility. I thought to myself as a 25-year-old, what can I do to make a difference in my community? And so for me, taking this material out into public spaces put me into a mindset of making a contribution and to educate the public in general about black history. And so he turned that dream into reality, carrying on the rich tradition of the Black Museum movement with the nation's premier Black history traveling exhibit. The exhibit, or the archive itself, is about 10,000 artifacts. And there's no time where we can bring all 10,000 artifacts in. So every year we do a different thematic exhibit. So this year's exhibit is in tribute to the 50th anniversary of hip-hop culture. Dr. El-Hakim says despite negative connotations tied to hip-hop culture, his exhibit highlights the best of what the culture has to offer. In the late 80s, we're listening to Public Enemy, and eventually they were talking about Fight the Power, and we were demanding more, and we were learning about Malcolm X, and we were learning about revolutionaries and leaders in the black movement. Hip-hop at its best demands more from the system, and it's an expression that transforms people, motivates people, inspires people to be better people. Here for you in East Lansing, Shamir Owens, 6 News.
And when we return, we'll take one more stroll through history and show you how you can follow in those footsteps. Over in East Lansing on Michigan State University's campus, there's a unique quilt on display at the MSU Museum. I got a chance to talk to the curator of this exhibit about just how meaningful this blanket is to a small community in Detroit. This is the signature quilt.
All of this started with the fabric on that quilt and the hands that made it.
Which belonged to women from Detroit, Michigan, who were members of the historic Zion Congregational Church of God in Christ. MSU Museum curator Marshall McDowell found this quilt in an interesting way.
In a quilt online store based in Oklahoma, and I saw this quilt. It had these names, each one appended by the word sister.
And included their Detroit address and phone number sewn in.
And I thought, that quilt needs to come home to Michigan.
She then began working with Berkeley Sorrells, who started doing research in December of 2020 to find out who these women were. After some digging into digitized newspapers and census data, including the Michigan Chronicle, she found what she was looking for.
A photograph occasionally of, some of these women, their father, who was a local pastor at another church.
With all of the collected data, they were able to fill in a lot of gaps and believe it was made around 1953.
One thing that was so great was how many of these women lived near each other, and how many of the women are related that are on the quilt.
The quilt is tangible evidence of a community, a vibrant community in Detroit, Michigan, of African Americans, and who all had a connection to each other and to a local church.
Unfortunately, McDowell says, the area was devastated by urban renewal. All of the houses these women lived in were torn down, but the church still remains. So they went back for a planned event with current members to share stories.
And there were memories of some of the women whose names are on this quilt, and their memories of quilt making and the role it played in the church.
For now, the quilt will be on display through the end of February.
One thing I hope people take away from this space is just to center and uplift these community voices and these women and their families and the people who remember them. And that shouldn't obviously just be during Black History Month, that should be all the time.
We want to thank you for joining us tonight as we honor Black history. And we want to thank everyone who is out there helping make a difference, no matter how big or how small, as we work to create a better city, state, and country for everyone. Have a great night.